Good morning, my name is Forrest Foxworthy and I'm an Oregon fishing guide, and this morning we're going to talk a little bit about where the side planer comes into play and what type of a tool it can be to help a bank angler catch salmon and steelhead. The side planer is an incredible tool if you are in a scenario where you can't fish plugs out of a floating device. What this does, this allows you to work that plug out in certain holding areas where salmon and steelhead like to migrate and or hold while they're resting, and give you the opportunity to fish very similar as if you were in a boat. The side planer setup, there's a couple things that I'll tell you this morning that will help make this a little bit easier. The rudders, when you put the rudders together, they're brand new and they tend to be a little sticky. So when you're taking that rudder on and off, you want to be careful. You don't want to force it on and off. Just slide that on and go nice and slow and easy and work it on. The way this is designed is you have a slot on both sides, so depending on which side of the river you're on, you can move this and manipulate that depending on which side. Always when you're fishing the rudder, it's going to be away from you. So whatever side you're on, that rudder will be on the opposite side of where you're standing. The second thing that can be somewhat tedious at times is the trip mechanism. Your metal trip arm, a lot of times when they come out of the package, as this one is right here, the trip arm mechanism is too loose, so it's not going to hold the tension when you let that out. So what you want to do is you want to loosen this spring, and you want to take your metal trip arms and you want to spring them. The one that's facing up, you want to spring towards you a little bit, and the one that's facing on the bottom, you want to spring away. You want to make those adjustments real little and come back and check it. So I've improved it some, but it's still too loose. So I'm going to flex it a little bit more to change that tension on that spring arm. Now what that's done is I've tightened that up to where you can work that in heavy current, but yet it will still trip when there's a fish on there. Now that you've got that trip mechanism set good, what you want to do is you're going to set your plug. In this case, I've got it on my vest right here on my waders. Set it right there so it's in a safe spot. Take your side planer and put it underneath your little finger. Put your reel and free spool, and then you're going to make your designated pulls out whatever distance you want this to be out. This particular piece of water we're on right now, I'm going to make about 10 pulls. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You want to have your plug a little bit away from you so it has a chance to work more natural. It's not having quite as much tension as if you're only out 4 or 5 pulls. I'm going to gauge my reel. I'm going to slide the trip mechanism or the arm towards me. Then I'm going to take the line and I'm going to wrap it around 3 times around the bill of the side planer, holding it with my thumb until that line gets tight between my trip mechanism and my rod tip. Once it's tight, then I can set that in the water. After I've set it in the water, before I start letting it out, I'm going to get my plug. I'm going to glance at my plug, make sure my hooks aren't tangled up, and then I'm going to slowly start to let that out. As that's going out, I'm going to set my plug in the water. And you're going to very slowly let the side planer work away from you until you get it out that distance that you're comfortable with where it's going to be. Once you get to your designated distance, then you can engage your reel. After you've engaged the reel, I like to keep my tip about eye level, maybe a little bit higher. And then what I'll do is, if I have the space to do it and I'm not going to impose on anybody else, I'll very, very slowly, methodically just inch my way down the bank. And I'll just work this entire piece of water as I've set that up. So right now you're going to notice I'm just very slowly going to creep my way down the bank. And you can, if you like to, you can take 2 or 3 steps and stop. Couple steps and stop, or you can stay stationary. You will not be able to feel the consistent pull of your plug. That's why it's important that you make sure your hooks aren't tangled up when you're letting it out. Otherwise, you could have that plug out behind your planer and the hook's tangled up and you're not effectively fishing because your gear's tangled up. You want to have a tendency to watch your side planer a lot, which is good, but you also want to glance downriver approximately the distance that your plug is, because sometimes those plugs will get a little bit of debris on them and they'll kick up on the surface, or as they're down there vibrating and wiggling back and forth, sometimes they'll hit a rock, your hooks will couple up and they'll come up on the surface. So as you're fishing your planer, You want to glance down river from time to time too and make sure that your plug is not on the surface. So as you're fishing that, now you're anticipating when a fish is going to strike and grab that plug. What will happen, there's two types of strikes on a side planer. Sometimes they're going to grab it, they're just going to grab it and pull that rod down real hard, and when that happens, of course, you're going to set the hook. But a lot of times they'll grab it and they'll bump it, and you'll see that bump with your planer, and your planer will bump down river a foot, bump again, and then they'll pull that rod over. You want to make sure you want to wait till the rod loads up before you set the hook. If you set the hook too soon, two things will happen. You'll miss your fish, and when you trip it, you got to crank it back in and start over again. Once you get to the end of your drift and you want to crank this in, there's a couple different ways you can do it. Some guys or gals, they like to trip that planer when it's out in the current and then crank it in. I do it a little bit differently. I like to crank that planer back in slowly. So I'll bring the planer in till it's quite a bit closer to me before I trip it. If you trip it out there in the main current, a lot of times most of the plugs that we're using have the ability to dive deep enough to hang up. If you bring it back at you slowly until it gets closer to you, then you have a lot less risk of hanging up. So the planer right now is about 20 feet from me. I'm going to trip it, and now I'm going to reel it back in. If you're cranking it in and you feel that plug hang up, don't pull real hard to get it off the bottom. Do just the opposite. Drop a little slack to it and gently lift it up, and 9 times out of 10 that plug will come up. If you pull on it real hard, you'll just bury that bill further into the bottom. Hopefully those will be some great tips for using the side planer. It's a great tool. You'll enjoy using it.